probably means 5 classes of students. And so the idea is that whether it's supporting teachers or working with students, that you'd have one resource teacher for every 5 classroom teachers. And of course, you'd have additional educational assistants who would help with specifics with specific students who need more intensive personal support. So this is our recommendation. And as the minister said, the investment announced is linked to utilizing teachers in the classroom who aren't needed because of declining enrollment, and reinvesting those positions into these support services. And I just want to say, like, there are people here from Nova Scotia, that's not what's happening there. When they have student decreases this year, they're eliminating teaching positions and they're disappearing. That's what's happening. And that's not what's happening here. Our progress is slower than we'd like, but hopefully over time we can get to numbers that are more reasonable for the workload of resource. How many people here are resource teachers? Okay, does it sound better to have 1 to 120 than where it is now? I hope you think so. The other area that we address is high schools. And the needs of kids in high schools and the need of high school teachers is quite different than elementary schools, where kids have one teacher most of the day. Middle school, it varies a bit, but in high schools it's much more complicated, and we think that it takes a lot more investment so that kids with special needs get the personalized service they need in our high schools. So we're recommending that the department focus on strengthening the staff in high schools to be able to do things more effectively for kids than they're doing now. And the minister has announced that they are doing this, and I think there's been, John can comment on that in a minute. The other thing is alternative education. It is needed. Some of the kids that didn't finish high school with me, they needed something different than the purely academic high school program that I followed. And everybody accepts that there are youngsters that we need to provide with an education that's appropriate who can't be even in regular schools because for social reasons, personal reasons, a variety of things that affect their lives, they need an alternative. But we have to keep that within a policy guideline. Currently in New Brunswick, there is no policy. Every district makes it up as they go. And the variation is significant. And in our report, you'll see the difference between districts. And there are practices that work well and practices that don't. Our recommendation is that alternative education should be for adolescents. Alternative education as a completely separate schooling experience should be something for a very defined group of students who have these needs that we agree, and as we develop a policy, and we're not presuming what exact details of the policy would be, but it shouldn't be just willy-nilly kids that are difficult to serve. It shouldn't just be at the convenience of the school. It should be for a described and defined population. Clear policy and criteria. The other thing is, in many school districts, kids, the solution to this problem of accommodation is to simply say, well, the Schools Act says we can provide education to you, but it doesn't have to be in school, so you're not going to come to school. We're going to provide home tutoring for you, and we're going to give you 4 hours a week. And quite frankly, in our view, and we would confess to being pro-student here, our position would be that that's not enough. That if you're going to serve a child entirely out of the school structure, it should be something like 12 to 15 hours a week. You shouldn't be able to buy off a solution with 4 hours a week. If the school system's going to tell your child that he or she can't come to the school, then they should provide a reasonable alternative to the 35 hours that kids get. We're almost finished.
Yes, and very quickly mentioned before that resolving conflict, this is entirely really to help the parents, but to help the parents work collaboratively with the schools and the school district. Because right now what is happening is often is that at the Department of Education, they get many, many calls from parents who are not comfortable with what is happening with their child. So there's no clear policy, again, no guideline to what parents all the help that they should get and that they can help, and maybe guidelines to help everybody work together. So this exists in other provinces. I know it exists in Nova Scotia. This was very clearly stated in the McKay report, but nothing has been done yet. So this is something that we brought back into our own report. A final word, I think that we want to say that this action plan, this book is actually quite thick. It has a lot of information. We first of all wanted to paint a picture of what's being done in inclusion today, since the McKay report came out. What has happened? Where are we now? And then with the different themes that came out, we came out with some pretty strong recommendations. We're very lucky right now because the Department of Education is working with us. So this is very, very interesting. Something that is also interesting is that people want to work with us. Everybody has said that they're ready to pull up their sleeves and we're going to get this done as far as we can go. When we talk about inclusion, I often say that there are two different parts to inclusive education. First of all, it's a philosophy, okay? And people will say, well, it's easy to say that we agree with inclusive education. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we want all the children to be happy and to be in the classroom and to be included in everything. But inclusion also comes with practices. And so far, that is the part that is difficult for teachers and principals and superintendents to deal with because we haven't always had the resources. Now, we're optimistic maybe, but we're hopeful that with this new plan of action, this new action plan, that we're going to get closer to where inclusive education should be. That people are going to understand really what is inclusion, what it should be, and how we should get there. So on that note, we'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and we'll pass it on to John.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's a great segue because the action plan that you spoke about actually is it's much thinner than the report itself. And this is available online as well. You can go on and check it out and read both the report as well as the action plan that we've established for year one to implement these the recommendations from the report. I have to bring you greetings from our Deputy Minister, Wendy McLeod-McKnight, who wanted very much to be here with you, but this morning her schedule changed and she just was unable to. So I was happy to come and to be part of this panel and to build on, I guess, the remarks from Gordon and Angela and the work that they've done, and to share with you what the major actions are that are going to be coming in the next year. This inclusive education is certainly a passion of Wendy's, and I know she would want me to bring greetings from our Minister, the Honourable Jody Carr, for whom inclusion is more than a passion. The depth of his commitment, I think, is quite incredible, and he, along with our Premier Alward, have really stepped up and given us the resources that we need so that this action is really going to help us to get to the goals that have been articulated by Gordon and Angela. I know that Gordon and Angela have worked tirelessly for the last year and a half, as have a number of people on the team at the department and district levels. And together they've provided some real thoughtful recommendations on how we can move forward so that all students benefit from an inclusive education. A year and a half ago, Minister Carr, when he was first appointed, presented a very ambitious agenda, and that was to improve the inclusive education realities in our schools for all students. And he certainly wanted and continues to want all children to thrive in the education system. And so building on the McKay report, where do we have to go from here? And I think Gordon and Angela are right that the implementation has been somewhat challenging. And I remember when Gordon brought his team to School District 15, where I was superintendent until a few weeks ago, And the first question that he asked was, you know, how is inclusive education in your schools? And I said, oh, Gordon, we embrace inclusion. Of course we do. You know, we believe all children should be included. And he said, well, that sounds well and good, but is there a deliberate commitment on the part of principals and teachers to make that happen? And that was a very important question for me, because it's very easy to use the language of inclusion, but there are certainly a lot of challenges that come with it. And so for me, that's been kind of a guiding principle since that time as a superintendent and now as ADM to try to create that deliberate commitment. Excuse me. And we certainly have been given the resources to make that happen. I think that this government has provided, as I'll mention later, that so in the next 3 years, there's about $62 million has been earmarked by the province to make these recommendations happen. The review that was done, I know that Gordon and Angela were selected to do this because they're intimately aware of the education system in New Brunswick, and that it needed to have an inside look and to be a shared investigation, really, so that people at the department level, at the district and the school level could be coming together to talk about inclusion as it now stands and to look at what could be done to improve it for all children, so that by the time the recommendations came out in that thick book, it was really informed by the real experiences and the real challenges and the real successes that are happening in our schools today. We do have wonderful professionals in our system. I know there are a number of teachers here today. Some of my colleagues from the department are here today as well. And all of them truly want to have a better education system for our students. They're all trying very hard to do things like differentiate learning for our kids, and that's very challenging to do. But that passion and commitment are there, and we have that to build on. So we're very grateful for not just for Gordon and Angela and their teams, but for everybody who participated in this study. So receiving the report, and now I have to give full disclosure here. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is really stuff that Wendy prepared for me, because until 3 weeks ago I really wasn't involved in receiving this report or in making this plan, although it seems like it's been a year and a half in the last 3 weeks that we've been working on this. But when this report was received, and it's quite thick, and when you first see it, and it's not double-sided, it's double that size, there's a lot in it. And so it was quite a daunting task for the people who looked at it and studied it to come out with what the action plan should be. And it was quite clear to Wendy and her team that year one had to create a very important foundation. And so that's where they began. And they knew there were many things that needed to start, but that there would be things over time. There were some short-term actions and some long-term as well. It was important to Wendy, as it was to the minister, and I know to the premier, that this report not just provide a checklist, okay, that's done. That's a platform commitment that's been done and put on a shelf somewhere. That this needed to be a real opportunity for change and growth that would reverberate across the province and actually into the future, so that it's a historic moment, we believe. The temptation, I think, anytime you have, oh, Wendy thinks, because she gave me this line, the temptation is anytime you have something like this come your way is to just look for the low-hanging fruit and to do the easy stuff and say, okay, that's done, and then say, we'll get to the other stuff later. But that wasn't good enough, and certainly wasn't good enough for a minister. And so some really important things, conditions were in there to allow us to do more than that. For one thing, there's a lot of new money that's been invested here. And new money is always good. Sometimes you get walking orders without any extra money to do things, but there was a lot of new money placed here. And the teaching positions that Gordon and Angela spoke about, that is indeed new money. Because although those positions have existed under normal circumstances, when your enrollment declines, you remove teaching positions from the field and you save a lot of money. It's costing a lot of money to keep those positions in to support this report. So money, a passionate staff, passionate researchers who really continue to want to help us to get there in a positive and collaborative way. And that's why Angela and Gordon are continuing to be involved in the implementation phase. And certainly a passionate minister and premier who are not content to just allow this to become a report that's done and sit on a shelf somewhere. Got ahead of myself. So over the past several months, Wendy and her team reviewed the report and came up with these action plans. Now, this is not, all of the things we do are not listed in here. And I'm learning as I've come to the department, and I'm working with all of the people in my branch, directors of various, in my division, directors of various branches, inclusion is part of everybody's world. We can't talk assessment without talking inclusion. We can't talk curriculum without talking inclusion. We can't talk curriculum development without talking inclusion. So it's everybody's business, and it's something that's really pulling us all together. And a lot of that you won't see reflected in here. So curriculum changes, or even the reorganization that's happening in the school districts out in the field right now, that's all an opportunity for us to be really enhancing our inclusionary model. All right, so I do want to share with you what the major investments are, and some of them I'll skip because Angela and Gordon have spoken about them already. The biggest one is the reprofiling of the additional teachers to be in methods and resource, guidance counseling position, behavior interventionist positions. And on the Anglophone side, that's 147 teachers who will be in the system next year who would not normally be. And that's very, very significant in a province our size. And I asked Angela, I'm not sure of the number, Gordon, I don't know if on the Francophone, so it's about 200 positions province-wide directly to support inclusion. And that's tremendous, and our superintendents now are out staffing those positions as we speak. We will have new PD modules in place to assist our staff in understanding good inclusion strategies and practices, and that's modules for teachers and for educational systems for all staff. Where the creation of the dispute resolution process that they spoke about, creation of education support services teams at schools that will now include literacy and numeracy teachers, in the Francophone system, francisation teachers, and those are teachers who work with Anglophone students who have a right to attend school in French, so that the supports are seen as very holistic at the school level. There is a creation of a new Director of Education Support Services in each school district, which is in addition to the traditional Director of Education, which will now be, there will now be a Director of Curriculum and Instruction and a Director of Educational Support Services. There's going to be building of internal capacity for autism training using quality certified staff and under the guidance of Quality Standards Committee of renowned local and internal experts to ensure that parents can be confident that their children are getting the best intervention possible. And that program is scheduled to begin this fall. More bilingual methods and resource teachers, a 20% funding increase in assistive technology, funding for community-based inclusion within child care facilities, transfer of key professionals from social and development and health to support integrated seamless approach, creation of capital improvements accessibility fund, development of multi-year training program for methods and resource teachers, creation of joint working group with CUPE 2745 to identify the roles and responsibilities of our valuable educational assistants, and ongoing support for the integrated service delivery model, which Angela spoke about, and also the establishment of an inclusive education advisory committee comprised of departmental staff and stakeholders for each sector, the Francophone and Anglophone, to be chaired by Angela on the Francophone side and Gordon on the Anglophone side, to assist and support and advise the department in implementing this plan. So those are the highlights in this plan, and again, you can read about it online. I do want to end with a quote from Wendy, directly from her, because I think it really speaks to why this is so important. She says, "It's clear to me that we are going in the right direction. This is not a question of philosophy per se, it is a question of human rights and the human rights of all our children, each of whom are unique and have unique attributes and unique challenges. We all learn differently, and we all deserve to learn to the best of our abilities, and we all deserve to have access to teaching and support that helps us on our unique journeys to learning." So I want to commend Angela and Gordon on their fantastic work, and everybody here who's participated and brought us to this point. This is a wonderful time to be in education and early childhood development. It's a building time in many ways, and continuing to build on the inclusive realities we have in our school system is something that's very important to me as ADM, and I know to Wendy as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very cognizant of the fact that I am the only thing standing between you and freedom. So I will be very conscientious of the time. I did mention to my colleague to my left that I am from Newfoundland, so I can speak very quickly. But out of respect for the signing, I think I'm going to have to keep going a little slow. When Gordon asked me to speak today, I thought, why am I here? And I know why I'm here. I'm here because I think that what I need to tell you is what we're doing in Ontario or what we're not doing in Ontario. And as the slide says, you know, sometimes when we have not seen something for a while, we begin to wax nostalgic, or we start to think we've found something new. So when you work in an inclusive system for a long time, you start to imagine the good old days, and maybe there's someplace else that kids can go, and maybe there's something else that kids can do, or somebody else who can teach them. So I'm here to give you the current status of Ontario. Before I do that, I would like to say I do have a brother here in Fredericton, and he lives at the Fredericton Hospital, and his wife and kids live in Noonan. Anybody here from Noonan? No Noonanites? He has a degenerative neurological disease which is ultimately fatal, and I have watched over the last 8 years as his life has shrunk to a hospital room. And today, when the lunchtime speaker was speaking, what struck me was the same thing that strikes me when my brother could still talk to us. Do you know what my brother would talk about all the time as his world shrunk around him? He would talk about how lonely he was. And for me as a lifelong educator, I'll be in education for 30 years this year. For me as a lifelong educator to contribute to classroom environments that shrink worlds for children and expose them to less diversity and less opportunity to be part of a big world, in my opinion, seems almost a criminal act. It's not about separating them out to somewhere else. It's about making where they are fit them. So that's, you know, I speak from personal and professional experience. What I want to say to you is that in Ontario, in 1982, when Bill 82 came into existence, 1985, it was fully implemented, many schools went with a segregated approach to special education service delivery. I was trained from 1978 to 1982. I was taught that there's a special magic powder that sits in your pocket as a special ed teacher, and you can sprinkle it on children when they come to you, and you can fix them. And that was very much the thinking, that expert model, the notion that somehow we could fix kids. But as time went on, many school districts across the country and around the world came to recognize, and I'll read specifically from the report. Gordon had the only copy, so I took it from him, but I have to give it back, apparently. We say there was a growing recognition that the promise of special education was not bearing the academic and social results that were anticipated. Indeed, the social skills and academic gains, once seen as the inevitable result of such expertise-driven service, proved questionable at best, and the realization of the negative results of segregation outweighed any anticipated benefits and was a catalyst for transition. I said last night to someone at dinner, you know, if all the special classes that we had worked, where are all the cured children? Who did we fix along the way? Currently in Ontario, if you look at the statistics for children, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, and that's the category I'm going to talk about for just a second, if you look 10 years ago in the elementary system, 68.8% of children who had developmental disabilities were segregated for all or part of the day. In 2010, which are the most recent numbers we have from the Ministry of Education, 68.7% of all children at the elementary level are segregated for all or part of the day. At the high school level, 10 years ago, 81% of children at the high school level who have intellectual disabilities spend all or part of the day in segregated classes. 10 years later, 80% of high school children in Ontario spend all or part of their day in segregated settings. What I'm going to share with you now are not my words. One of the things that we talk about a lot in special education is emancipatory research. And what we mean by that is we very seldom ask people who are directly involved. We certainly never ask kids. We often have educational researchers like myself who make a living out of talking about things that we don't necessarily personally experience. So I'm going to share with you for the remaining 9 minutes or so a letter that it was written by a parent in a school board in Ontario recently. I worked directly with this parent. She's an amazing woman. And her son Jacob, who I have met, and he is a fascinating young man, he was included fully from grade kindergarten to grade 8, and then he moved neighborhoods. And in his neighborhood, which is a very ritzy part of metropolitan urban area in Ontario, he was moved to what we would think of in Ontario as one of our premier boards. It is the flagship for many of the positive and progressive practices that happen in education. At least that's what their press says for them. I'm not sure it counts in special ed. He has been in 2 years in a segregated classroom, and let me tell you what he has learned. I'm going to read the letter in a second, but you know what Jacob has learned in 2 years? And this is from his mother, okay? Now, this is a boy who gets bused to the back of a high school. There are 4 classes in the center. The center is what it's called. And in those 4 classes, all the children from that city who have special needs are sent. The bus comes to the back of the school. They go into the center, which is, yes, highly funded, very low pupil-teacher ratio, all kinds of expertise, all kinds of computerized equipment, which is mostly used for Facebook and surfing the web, by the way. The parent who spoke earlier about what happens in special ed classrooms and the amount of time wasted was very accurate. If you were to walk into the center, you'd think, wow, look at all the stuff. They get bused to the back of the center, they get out of the bus, they get picked up at the end of the day, they get taken out again. The center has its own newsletter. Jacob has never received the school newsletter for his high school. In 2 years, he has never walked in through the front door of his high school. They have 1 toilet that serves the 4 classrooms in the center. The kids from the special needs rooms are only allowed to use that toilet. And if it is occupied, they must wait. They can't go into the big school, as they call it, to use another toilet. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in high school, wandering around looking for a toilet was a big pastime for me. Anything to get out of class. I don't know why kids with special needs shouldn't be allowed to do it. They have 1 water fountain that is clearly marked, special needs children only. So whenever we think about going backwards, let's try to remember what backwards looks like, okay? So this is what the mom finally wrote to her school. I met her at a dinner party a couple of years ago. We've become quite close. We think of ourselves as good cop, bad cop. I'm the bad cop. And this is the letter she wrote in her own words, and I'm only reading you part of it because it's 6 pages long. So let me read you some highlights. She says, "Dear," and she talks to her son's special ed teacher, "I am writing with respect to a growing concern regarding my son's education. After numerous conversations with experts and hours of research and a strong sense of knowing what is best for my son, I feel it is important to document my position and begin to make requests for some important changes in his program." Now, if you're thinking I'm talking about an anomaly in education in Ontario with its specialized services and rich resources, I am not talking about an anomaly. I'm talking about standard practice, particularly for kids with developmental disabilities. I am not questioning whether or not your staff cares about my son. They do, and he feels that. And I think that that's really important to remember. A lot of this is not out of caring. I'm questioning his placement and programming based on his individual needs and not what makes sense logistically for staff and management. I'm seeking change and hope that it might happen collaboratively with all those concerned for his well-being. Jacob is generally very outgoing, exuberant, and charming. He's very social and enjoys meeting new people and being involved in a number of things. Jacob himself continues to express interest in being integrated into the mainstream, both old words. He sees himself as a regular student. Up until he was in grade 8, he was a regular student. He sees himself as a regular student and desires to be treated as such and to be given the opportunity to be part of the whole student body, not just the center. He often feels cut off and segregated from the rest of the school, and he has the ability to question the choices being made for him. I wonder if the environment, having the center as a separate part of the school, contributes to his feeling of segregation, creating an us and them mentality for him. I feel it's important to share examples and provide my interpretation of conversations we've had in the past. As you are aware, Jacob was encouraged to try out for the football team. He remains friends with some of the guys from the team. He says hi to them in the halls, but he says that he is not allowed to sit with them in the cafeteria. He says that the center kids must sit together. When he questioned this, he was told that it makes those kids feel uncomfortable. So when his class goes to lunch in the large cafeteria in the high school, they must sit together. I was recently told by you, while expressing my concerns about holding Jacob back from greater integration and opportunity, that Jacob needs to get used to being with other kids with special needs, since that will be his future, living with kids with special needs, and he needs to learn how to adapt and be tolerant of their issues. When I asked if Jacob could go into the mainstream music or drama class, you said no, because he was not ready, and they don't have enough EAs for that. I said I didn't think he needed an EA for those situations. I want him to have an opportunity to try, and Jacob continues to ask for this as well. He feels held back, controlled, and it fuels his frustration. I offer some additional information about situations in which Jacob's doing very well in the Youth Drop-In Center with mainstream kids, and I mentioned that he thrives on this. I suggested that if he was given the opportunity, he would rise to it being included in the regular classroom. I worry that if he continues to be held back, he will not be motivated to change, and he may regress in both behaviors and learning, a situation that as a parent I am not willing to explore or risk. You suggested that if I placed him in the life skills class, that's a level up from the class he's in. It's still segregated, but they do life skills. When I teach about life skills, I always make the students, I always go like this, life skills. I'm not sure how making a sandwich is a life skill or doing laundry. I have a son who can fly a plane. He can do neither of those things. I should have put him in life skills. Further, you suggested that if you placed him in the life skills class, this is what the teacher said to her, the other kids would make fun of him and that he would be labeled for the rest of his high school experience. So you were, in essence, protecting him from that, since you feel he is not mature enough. I vehemently disagree and suggested that I thought he could handle this, in fact, learn from just this type of experience. I do not want to overly protect him from the norms of society. Rather, I want him to learn from his experiences in a more challenging social situation. As an example, I mentioned to you about his experience at the drop-in center when a teen told him, "Dude, you stink." This had a bigger impact on shaping his behavior in a positive way towards life skills of proper hygiene, self-care, and how to handle social situations, much more than mom telling him to have a shower, and much more than social skills classrooms talking about abstract concepts. He is capable of more, he expects more, and I expect more. And I'm going to skip over just a little bit. When we talk, and trust me, the parts I'm skipping over are beautiful and magnificently written. When a mother speaks from her heart, you can hear it in her voice. When we talk, you are very warm and caring. You definitely have a passion for these kids and believe that you are doing what is best for them. When I provide my point of view, you do not seem satisfied until you are able to convince me of your own point of view. I find it difficult to challenge you due to your experience and position of authority. I feel like I am viewed simply as a parent who does not understand the needs of my own son and has unrealistic expectations for him. I do not think my expectations are unrealistic. My son has the right to participate in society, and although he may require some support as an adult, I am determined to ensure that he is included in mainstream society in every possible way where he will thrive and feel fulfilled. He has that right. It's a much longer letter than that, but I think you have the essence. She's had enough. 2 years. You know what Jacob's learned in 2 years? Something he's never done before. Okay? Jacob's very verbal. Amazing, amazing kid. My son, who's 21, the one that can fly a plane and not make a sandwich, he came to breakfast with us. He got in my car afterwards and said, "Mom, he's smarter than most of the kids I went to high school with. The guy is amazing." But you know what he does now? He does this. You know why he does that? Because he's been in the classroom with the same 8 kids for 2 solid years. He has never darkened the door of another classroom. What's he doing? He's doing what he's seeing. That's what he's doing. And this is a statement for Ontario, not for New Brunswick, because you guys are awesome. I know it doesn't feel that way, and I know there are struggles, but you're awesome. It makes me want to move to New Brunswick. And this is part of the report. It is past time to pull back the curtain and shine a light on some of the embedded practices that continue to permeate educational settings across Ontario. These practices, which were born out of an ethic of caring and protectionism and devised in an era of expertise and curing, are horrifyingly outdated in a modern world. To reach the goal of full inclusive practice and to allow for all of our students to engage in a truly diverse community, we must make some seemingly radical but long overdue decisions to stop, once and for all, the systematic discrimination that blatantly exists within Ontario schools for students who have special needs. And I'm going to end with an example from the document. Recently, a mother, and it's like 1 minute to 5. Recently, a mother shared with the authors of this document, and I have to say this document was written by myself and a wonderful colleague of mine, Dr. Tiffany Gallagher, who has done lots of research with me and is as committed to inclusive education and good practice and cares deeply about children as I do. Recently, a mother shared with the authors that her 18-year-old daughter, who has an intellectual disability, has to be walked into her school each day and dropped off at the special needs room. Her daughter, who was fully included at the elementary school level, has progressed from walking to school on her own, playing in the schoolyard with her friends, getting herself to class at the age of 8, to now being escorted into class at the age of 18. Policy, protectionism, embedded practice, and bureaucratic convenience are only some of the factors that have combined to create an environment in which this would be considered normal. I wish you all the best in New Brunswick. I wish every school system in the world was like this. And I know that it's hard, but segregation didn't work either. It's a moral choice. The rest is just stuff. I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out, especially with all the wonderful support. Thank you.
We'll take a few minutes for questions. If you have questions, if you could go to the microphones, please. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Porter, at the outset, you stated, I believe, to my surprise, that inclusion does not mean inclusion in the mainstream classroom. And I say surprised because you've been quoted or misquoted perhaps differently. In a recent Newfoundland report, you were stated as saying that inclusion is about children being educated in a regular classroom in their neighborhood with their chronological peers. Now, having said that, I was prepared to set aside my preconceptions until I heard this last bit from our good friend from Ontario. We've just sat here for 10 to 15 minutes hearing horror stories about the evils of segregation, which is, of course, in itself a term that originated with the inappropriate exclusion of people of African American heritage from American schools. Discrimination based on ability has been seen by the American sources in many locations, and Mr. Archer is a name I'm sure you're familiar with, as being a rational response. I'm very disappointed, quite frankly, on this good very sunny Friday afternoon to listen to a report of a parent in another province where there were some obvious horror stories going on, read as though that's representative in some meaningful way of what constitutes a proper and legitimate removal from the classroom. Because that's what I heard, and I've heard it before. I heard it during the McKay Inclusion Review when I was told, and another Autism Society representative was told, that we should be thankful for what we have instead of trying to address the real needs of our children based on the evidence and based on modern practices in treating and educating autistic children. Is this what this report is about? Is just another attack on the so-called evils of segregation based on things like a horror story in another province? We've developed some very good resource centers and segregation, if you want to use that term, to remove children from the classroom so that they can receive, without causing injury to themselves, and according to proper practices for autistic children recognized by the highest authorities in the United States, which is ABA, and without having that disrupted. That's the types of practices we've developed in New Brunswick, and we did it over opposition from many people in the organization that you've referenced there, the NBACL. I was actively involved with those movements. I encountered fierce resistance, and I heard it again here today, and I'm really disappointed. It's not a question, it's a speech, it's a rant. I was prepared to accept that I was wrong about your positions on mainstream as the be-all and end-all until I heard this rant. I'm very disappointed.
I think I'll go back to what I said before. I spent 30 years working on this in New Brunswick schools, and I have never, ever said that every child should be in the regular class all the time, no matter what. I think there's a commitment of public education to do its best to include children, but I think as soon as parents give information, when teachers get feedback from a child themselves, if there are personalized approaches other than being in the regular class, those should be planned and executed with quality. And I would guess that my friend from Ontario agrees with that. She could speak for herself.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
The problem
No,
is...
let me speak.
Yeah, but she may not agree with that. The problem is we have extremes on both sides. I grew up in a town, and I became involved with this issue when I was a school principal in Heartland, and I volunteered to work as a volunteer with parents who operated the Peter Pan School in Woodstock. And what I saw was a public-private partnership, much like a previous speaker at this conference has spoken about, where all the public did was pay the salaries of the teachers, and the parents had to raise the money to buy the building, they had to provide the transportation, pay the heating bill, fix the plumbing when it broke, buy all the materials, because the public education system was not committed to serving those children. The struggle for what we now call inclusion is about remedying that wrong. And the remedy is that we include people, but we provide personalized alternatives, not group alternatives, not a class of children who are simply labeled. Like in those days, in Woodstock, children from Centerville to Nakawik got on little buses and taxis and scurried their way up to Woodstock to be in this segregated school. The reality is that things very much like that are still happening in Ontario. I get emails constantly from parents who are told, well, you can have your child in this local community school, but there are no supports available. If you want your child to have a specialist teacher who might be able to handle them, it's 4 or 5 neighborhood school blocks over on the other side of the city, or maybe it's not physically that far, but it's not the child's community. And it's a significant disruption in the life of the family to have to, for example, here, if a child in Woodstock was told that the alternative school that their child could be served in was in Heartland, or even further afield in Florenceville, it would be a bit of a struggle for the child, for the parents, and for the family. So we have wrongs that have been done, but it's also wrong to presume that everybody is served well all the time, no matter what, in the regular class. And I don't believe, I've had many experiences where we organize alternatives that work for the child. But when and if it's possible, we increase the amount of involvement with other children. So it's got to be a personalized approach that's supported by professionals who work with parents respectfully, that listen to them, that cooperate in using the best techniques, the evidence-based practices that will make a difference. There's a vision here of a school that can serve all children effectively and do it in inclusive ways, but to provide them with the personalized service that individuals who have needs that need to be met in an appropriate way. It does not mean putting 10 children labeled with autism or mental retardation or learning disabilities all together in a place where they spend most or all their day. We can do better than that. New Brunswick schools are doing better than that. They're not uniformly better. We need to improve them. But the strategies that our report has set out are part of what I think are a coherent effort to increase both the quality of education for everybody and the personalization that's needed for those students who need it. And my view on New Brunswick is not that we're perfect or that we should be grateful that we're doing what we do. My point about New Brunswick, and the point I've made in the past, is that in New Brunswick, children are by and large, and if there are exceptions, I'd like to hear about them. Basically, you can send your child to the local community school. And I think out of the 320 local community schools in our province, most of them do a good job of welcoming the children and trying to do a good job in serving them. In many parts of Canada, that's not true. And I could tell you some horror stories, too, about parents who have sold their house and moved to a different community, who've had lost their jobs because the school calls them at 10 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon and say, your kid who has an intellectual disability or autism is misbehaving, and you come and get them out of here. And, you know, parents who struggle with the school not being responsive. Now, if we have schools that aren't responsive and are executing inappropriate practices, then I think we need to work on it. But I think we need to be grateful that we have, I think we need to be celebrating the fact that we've reached the point where our schools don't shut people out at the door. A colleague of mine in Toronto went with a family to a school in the last few years. They walked into the office in August, up to where the principal and the secretary were, and when they reached the secretary looked at the family. They said, "We want to enroll our child." The secretary did a second look, looked at the child, obviously saw the child had Down syndrome, and said, as a matter of policy, "We don't do Downs here." And what she meant was, Down syndrome children who live in our community go over there. And that's what we don't want. We want children dealt with personalized and individually and appropriately with support. And that's what I stand for, and I have for 30 years. I got into this by accident. I was a history teacher and a principal. And I believe firmly that teachers are able to do it. Teachers are able to do it better than we are today, next year, next week. And I'm profoundly confident of the teaching profession and the educational assistants and the people that work to build public education that we can do it better. It's certainly being done better in my lifetime than it was, and I think we can do it better still in the future. And if we listen to each other, work together, not get engaged in ideological firestorms, but instead in practical, pragmatic discussions about what will work better in this situation, we can do that. Sheila.
You know, Gordon, it's hard to get a mic out of your hand when you get it in there, so I'm going to be very brief, but thank you. You actually said a lot of what I said. In Ontario, I had the opportunity to work for 18 months with our former Minister of Education, Kathleen Wynne, who was a wonderful, amazing lady. And one of the things we talked about in Ontario goal that we have is that we want to have, we didn't say everything should be inclusive. We said that any separation from a classroom should be duration specific and intervention focused. So as an education system, you need to be able to say, I'm going to remove this child from their peers, from the family, from the home school, from the environment, because I'm going to do this. And I know that I'm going to spend this amount of time doing it. So there are always exceptions. We have a long way to go in Ontario. And I do need to say to you that as a province, the direction that you're moving in is very positive and an example to the whole country. But I will also say that there's a lot of work to be done. And I agree with your last comments wholeheartedly, Gordon. If we get caught in ideological controversies around entrenching ourselves in position, then the result of that is the conversation just stops. And we start to bully and be aggressive and do things to each other that aren't good in terms of communication. So, you know, I'm not going to stand between you and your glass of wine, but I did want to say that you should be proud of yourselves. And Gordon and, you know, Angela, good job on the report.
Thank you. One more question?
For Dr. Porter, regarding I'm a high school resource teacher, and
Excuse me, could we just, we have one question here first.
Oh, sorry.
I work as a community support worker with the deaf community. I'm also a literacy teacher. I've really enjoyed your presentation. For us, obviously, the concern is deaf children. For us, the concern mostly is modified programming. The deaf children who graduate high school don't have an equivalent diploma, grade 12 diploma, and then they're being blocked from other options, post-secondary jobs, because they don't have a quote-unquote high school diploma. And the reason for that is that their programs have been modified. So my papers keep blowing away. So my suggestion would be for deaf students, anyway, is first of all to not modify their programs and deal with that, but also to start their transition to either post-secondary or to employment much earlier. Right now it starts at about grade 10. And that needs to start earlier. Also, we need to deal with interpreting services and make sure that they're getting the absolute best interpreting services possible in the school system, so their programs don't have to be modified, and the best qualified interpreters. So that was my comment. Oh, do you mind if I just add one more thing? When we talk about qualified interpreters, there are a lot of signers in the school system that are not qualified. They might be doing a fairly decent job of getting information to the student, but they're not being role models, they're not being language models, and because the programs are modified, they're interpreting at a lower level than the education that the peers are getting. So qualified, certified interpreters is something that's really important in order to not have to modify programs and let deaf people graduate with a diploma that's equivalent to their hearing peers. And for students in elementary school, deaf students who grow up in hearing families, the other important issue is getting them that language in the first place and using deaf employees of the school system to do that.
Thank you.
We had another question?
I just wanted to, as a high school resource teacher, am I too close to that? I just wanted to know the 60% supporting classroom teachers. How do you see that? Because I see that we support classroom teachers a lot, and I'm just wondering how you see that role changing.
Well, most kids, by definition, who have needs for some accommodation are already in regular classes.
Right.
Like, we're not talking about pushing kids in that haven't been there. The problem is, in many situations and in many provinces, and I'll refer to Newfoundland, Labrador, where I spent a fair amount of time. I was in a community where a middle school, quite large middle school, had 10 resource teachers. And the principal of the school was at a session and said, well, you know, there are still more kids who have needs that we're not able to meet their needs. We're not able to have them see a resource teacher. So I talked to this person a lot more in detail. And what emerged was that the resource teachers, and this is a few years ago, and I'm sure my friend Jackie's made changes in it since, but they had a lot of resource teachers. They were well supplied, maybe an 800-900 student school. And the resource teachers were pulling little groups of kids who had learning challenges, of reading disabilities, and I know all about that. I trained in that in the 70s, and I spent some of the years in my early career being a learning disability specialist. So I know how that's done and the rationale for it. But what they were doing is pulling a few kids out of each class who the teacher said could do with some extra help. And all of these resource teachers were spending all of their day working with small groups of kids. The kids were still spending 4 or 5 hours a day back in the regular class. And if their needs were such that they needed this intervention, wouldn't it make some sense that there'd be something you do with their classroom teachers to try to build their capacity so that maybe a few of them, either the follow-up would be better, or maybe some of them wouldn't have to do that? And the fact is, that isn't what was happening. It was all send out the 3 or 4 or 5 kids from your class, and instead of having 10 resource teachers, we should have 12, was the solution to the problem. And I think there needs to be balance. I think that there are kids that need pull out on occasion for some purposes, but like Sheila said, it should be focused on a particular purpose and for a particular time. It shouldn't be just you do it as a routine. And you have to balance the work of the resource teacher to build capacity in the classroom so that over time, the regular teacher is able to handle some of these challenges more appropriately. So if resource teachers are not in the classroom, giving the teachers the benefit of their experience and advice and assistance, and co-teaching or cooperative teaching to help improve things, at least part of their time, then I think that we'll never have a situation where we have enough resource teachers. You know, if you tell any teacher, and I've been a classroom teacher, if you say, well, Gordon, you've got 30 kids or 25 kids in your class, can you identify 3 or 4 of them that if we took them out for an hour and had a specialist teacher work with them, it might benefit them. I'm always going to be able to find 4 kids that I'll say yes to that too. And some of them really need it. But I think that the model gone amok is that we work with the kids, but we never do anything to help build the capacity of the teacher. And I spent 7 or 8 years as a teaching at the University of Maine at Presque Isle in teacher education, and almost all my students were students from Canada, from New Brunswick, who had a degree, and then they were working to become a teacher. And I can tell you that the 1-year training they got to become a teacher was not sufficient to meet a career in education with the kind of challenges teachers need now. They need ongoing support, they need ongoing staff development activities to meet the needs of the kids they have. So I think you need a balance in the work of the resource teacher, a balance that often isn't there now.
Okay, I guess I'm still unclear as to, in the high school system, if I'm not, if biology, for instance, isn't my area of expertise, I couldn't possibly go in and co-teach in a biology class.
You don't have to be a biology teacher expert in order to coach a biology teacher on how to run cooperative learning
maybe I
groups.
misunderstood. I thought you said co-teach.
Well, no, well, that could be it.
Okay.
But
okay. No,
if you shouldn't be a resource teacher if you don't know something about how to improve basic instructional strategies, how to use
no, I guess I misunderstood. I thought you said that we were going to be co-teaching.
Oh, no.
Okay, thank you.
Well, in that part of the states, they use co-teaching, and, you know, that means that you have a regular class and you put another teacher in with 10 kids with disabilities, and that's supposedly co-teaching. I don't think we're ever going to have the money to do that in New Brunswick.
Well, this has been a very interesting session, and I thank the speakers and you for your attention, and please join me in thanking the speakers, and we'll see you back here for supper.